Welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable. Mike Maroone is one of the best known and one of the most highly regarded automotive leaders in our time. He and his family are now in their third generation in the retail automotive business, where Mike started out at his family's Ford dealership in Western New York, then becoming the general manager of the first Maroone dealership in South Florida. The Maroone Automotive Group would grow to 9 dealerships before merging with AutoNation in 1997, where Mike became the key architect and served as president and chief operating officer until 2015. Today, Mike Maroone leads his family of dealerships, which consists of retail outlets in Colorado and Florida. Mike, welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Ted, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be part of your roundtable and look forward to both sharing some of our thoughts, but learning from some of your other presenters.
Mike, I got to tell you, I asked you, and I'm so grateful to have you back by popular demand. A lot of folks really loved the segment that we did together last year, and I'm really humbled to have you as part of the event. And I think you've got some great insights. So if you don't mind, in the last 2.5 years, once again, dealers have proven themselves to be extremely resilient. What would you say are some of the positive takeaways that you can say our industry's had?
Ted, I think the biggest takeaway is we've learned that we have to adapt and flex. This retail environment is so different. We've moved to factory orders and selling incoming units and being able to operate on very low inventories. It's a total shift, especially for the high volume domestic stores. Some of the import stores dealt with this kind of stuff years ago, but it's new to those of us on the domestic side. I think secondly, learning to acquire used vehicles privately and outside the auction channel was really important. And it's been one of the keys to our success. And finally, just reintroducing to every retailer the value of fixed operations, that gross margin, the retention opportunity. So those three things are really what come to mind. And it's been a great chapter for auto retail. Everyone knows the profits are strong, everybody's energized, but most importantly, we've learned to adapt and flex into a totally different environment.
I don't ever remember even hearing about an environment like this in the past. You mentioned fixed ops, Mike. What do you think? How important will service, parts, body shop, how important will that be to the success of dealerships moving forward?
I think it's going to be more important than ever. There's two key components here. One is it's the best way to retain guests. And just to refresh your memory, we don't have customers, we have guests. And guest retention really occurs, certainly it occurs in the sales transaction, but it's reinforced in the service transaction. And creating that trust is essential to repeat purchasing and building our customer base. The second piece is service is where the gross margin is, and the downstream gross generated post-sale is critical to the dealership. So first of all, service is not easy to execute, but it's essential to building a viable business.
Yeah, I agree so much. I have heard you say in some interviews that I've seen where you spoke about the hybrid model for our industry as we move into the near future for vehicle sales. Guests still want to come in and they want to see and they want to drive the vehicle, but how do you see that playing out and evolving for our industry in the future?
Well, Ted, it's been a fascinating learning to watch. For many years, we focused on having our frontline displays being the thing that attracted guests in. Today, the frontline display has got so little impact on the guest experience. People search, people research, they do all kinds of things online, and then they pivot. Some come into the stores to shop, some want to go through an online experience. And our job is to be able to provide great information, make sure they can get consistent information regardless of channel, and be able to serve people in a totally different way. We've got huge online sellers like Carvana and others. And then you've got very traditional retailers. And I think guests are somewhere in the middle. A lot of people will go test drive at a local dealership and then search inventory over a much broader geography. We've got to be patient with those folks and we've got to provide a value in the experience, whether it's online or offline. I think it's exciting. but I don't think you can typecast how our guests want to shop. We're just going to have to be prepared to fulfill either way. And I like it. I think it's fun.
And you, if you don't mind, you've had a front row seat on both the electronic side with guests shopping online for their vehicle, and now, as I mentioned, the hybrid model. You've had a fascinating role in all of this. So,
well, I'm blessed to have a perspective from several different angles, and it's well known that I serve as the lead independent director at Carvana. So I get insights into how they manage traffic, how they fulfill, how their systems work, how their logistics work. And at the same time, I come back in my world where I don't necessarily have those same resources, but I have guests that have very high expectations. So we spend a lot of time training. We work really hard on fulfilling the guests' needs, regardless of what their point of entry is or how they want to be treated. It's a fun time.
you mentioned expectations, and you're right. Our industry is, we've got expectations on the part of the guest and as part of the dealer network as well. And Mike, with all the talk, especially lately, about EVs, electric vehicles, factory to direct online sales, we've heard Jim Farley talking about it over at Ford. A lot of dealers, the chatter has been, and you've seen it as well online, that some dealers feel that maybe they're going to be at risk of being cut out of that sales process that's been in place for 100 some years. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly share concerns that dealers have expressed. I also have a lot of confidence that the franchise system has added value for many, many, many years. And to extrapolate out what Tesla and Rivian have done, which are very different models, into today's existing OEM dealer relationships it's really an apple and an orange. Tesla came out, and you have to admire Elon. He's an incredible entrepreneur, but he came in an environment where there was literally no competition. He funded his company and drove certain levels of profitability by selling credits to OEMs. It wasn't a typical launch. Rivian's got a different situation. Rivian's got 100,000 orders from Amazon and a huge shareholder in Amazon. So their situation's different. I am concerned when I see some of the OEMs going outside the country and creating more direct relationships. I think it's a big mistake. I think they totally ignore the value of the service end of the business. They ignore the value that dealers have provided for over 100 years. And I hope that they don't try and destroy that. The thing that's most concerning on EVs to me, Ted, is EVs are really just a different powertrain. People talk about we need to be prepared for this huge change in the industry. It's just a powertrain, just like an internal combustion engine, just like a hybrid performance. Now it's an electric vehicle. I don't think we need to tip the world upside down, but I think we do have to be ready to adapt, to make sure our people are trained, make sure our facilities are ready. But I am hoping we don't move to a direct sales model, and I think it would be a huge mistake.
In your opinion, what do you think? Is this all about copying that Tesla model? And would that be a smart thing for OEMs to do? Given the fact, like you mentioned, that the dealers are local, and as we said, the dealers have proven resilient time and time again.
Ted, every model's got flaws. The reason everybody focuses on Tesla is they have a very high market capitalization. Growth companies have high market caps. They don't always stay high. And I believe that the OEMs have been frustrated for many years at very low price earnings ratios. And I think they're doing the things they need to do to try and gain more market share, make the right investments in technology and product. And I admire what they're doing, but you can't buy a high growth market share out of a traditional business, or a high growth valuation out of a traditional business. So I think it's tempting, but I think you also have to look at the Tesla model, where there's quality issues and there's huge parts and service issues. And I believe the service network continues to be one of the key ingredients that support the existing franchise system. I also believe that there should be pressure on retailers to improve their guest experience, to be more transparent, and to do the things that meet modern customers' needs, not run old car guy ways.
I agree with you. I met with a dealer yesterday, and he mentioned to me that his OEM, who's been talking about that Tesla model in service and parts leaves a lot to be desired. They're not as focused on the guest as the dealers who've now built these processes over many, many years. So he sees it as an opportunity in what's coming with EVs.
We have to respect the competition, but I think we've got to continue to fine tune our model and get better at what we do. And I think we can have some level of control.
Speaking of control, one thing or many things that the dealers can't control are some of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier. The chip shortage, gas prices this year, interest rates, a lot of things are in flux. What do you think, what should dealers be focused on right now?
I think we should be focused on acquiring, reconditioning, merchandising, and turning used car inventories. I think we've got to continue to hone our skills on selling incoming new and turning our new vehicle inventories very, very quickly. And we've got to keep working in service to attract more and better technicians, more and better service consultants, and to work very hard to take all these software tools that are available and integrate them into our dealership to create a much higher value experience than we have traditionally. As you said, there are many things outside our control. I think there's a lot inside our control, and I'm excited about continuing to invest in the business and to push our team to a much higher level of performance.
One of the things that I've seen here at the Fixed Ops Roundtable, in Mike, in many of the panels that we've brought together, we decided a while back that some of the panels that we should hear from should just be technicians and hear from their point of view, because they've been the unsung heroes, if you will. And as you mentioned, service is such a big driver at what happens at the dealership level. And one of the things that we've learned is that what attracts technicians and what helps retain them is the dealership culture. It's not just the money. And that's really opened a lot of eyes. And now we're hearing that phrase of dealership culture proving to be a major driver, and a lot of folks are talking about it. You have built a great culture, both at your dealerships, earlier at AutoNation. What made you focus on the culture so early?
I think it starts with a couple basic premises, Ted. First of all, we want to be a great place to work and a great place to shop. And I know that sounds very simple, but if you accomplish both of those things, the culture comes with it. We call ours a culture of caring, where it starts with our associates caring for each other and doing different things to help people that may be having a tough day or have a tough guest in front of them. We then try and extend that culture into our guests to say, your needs and solving your problems now becomes our challenge and our obligation. And we want to do it in the most caring way. And I've been brought up by, when I brought up by my dad, who was a great retailer, he always talked about showing empathy to the guests, showing empathy to your associates, putting other people first in front of yourselves. And that's what makes a great place to work and a great place to shop. And I'm in a number of other businesses outside of automotive, and I have the same feeling in every business about creating this culture of caring, and it's worked very well for us.
Yeah, so important. One of the things that we're also hearing here at the roundtable is the growing interest in mobile service, in being able to go to the customer and perform a lot of these services, some of the more basic ones, without having to come to the dealership. Mobile service. Brian Benstock, prior to the pandemic, shared with us what he was doing on service pickup and delivery. And mobile service has now risen from what we see to some of the top interest. Of course, Tesla does that as well. I know Ford Motor Company's in it in a big way. What are your thoughts on mobile service?
Well, first of all, I think it's aspirational. I think it's something that is good for guests. And if it's good for guests, we better work at it and build that capability. But I would tell you, it's very hard to execute. You already know, labor, the vehicles are complex. You don't always know what you need in terms of parts. You don't have all your tools with you. Yes, these mobile vans are outfitted for very basic things, but it's hard. It's also hard to find and motivate technicians who are accustomed to working in flat rate and are accustomed to having big parts availability and all the special tools around them. It's hard to hire, train, motivate, and retain those technicians. With that said, if that's what guests value, we're just going to have to figure it out. So we're testing it in one store. It's not easy to get off the ground, but I do think it's worth testing. I would also offer that in the EVs, in the ability for the over-the-air improvements and updates in software, it could get easier and easier. So I don't want to be negative on mobile. I'm just telling you it's hard. I think pickup and delivery is another thing that is very appealing to some guests. Some don't care for it. And we've got to get better at that. And that's hard to do too. It's very labor intensive. But those are capabilities that we need to develop. I'm excited about doing that. And I think if that's what the guests want, then that's what they ought to have.
It's amazing, isn't it? How our business continues to evolve, and those guest expectations are the driving factor in all. Mike, this year we're hearing again, we haven't heard for a while about the Federal Trade Commission, FTC. Now we see in the headlines with proposals, different possible regulations for car dealership price advertising, even F&I disclosures. What are your thoughts on that? And ultimately, is that good for our industry?
Well, I think you have to start with the positive, and the positive is transparency and compliance with existing law is very, very important, and it should be a foundational component of every business we operate. The reality of it is every single state has laws in effect that in many cases aren't being enforced, especially on advertising violations. There's so many of them, it's very difficult to enforce. Do we need the FTC to come in and drive that? I personally don't think so. But if it makes the industry more consistent, more compliant, then I welcome it. Where I struggle is when they try and dictate which products they think have value. I think that is absurd. It's a gross overreach for them to say this product shouldn't be sold, this product should be sold. I don't think that's the role of the FTC. I'd say lastly, one of the things that bothers me as a citizen of the US is how the FTC's emphasis seems to roll with political control. I kind of would prefer the FTC to be a professional organization that had consistency through administrations. Now, that may be wishful thinking, but I hate to see it flip-flop based on who's in office at what period of time. But if I go back again to the basics, transparency and compliance are important, and those retailers that skirt the state laws and ignore some of the things that are good basic principles, I think put the entire industry at risk.
Great points. Super points. Finally, last question, Mike, for today. Looking out over the horizon, here we are in September, going into the last part of 2022 and then going into 2023. A lot of dealers, a lot of managers, retailers watching today. What advice would you have for them, for their business looking forward? Fixed ops is the focus, obviously, service and parts, but any recommendations from Mike Maroone for our audience?
Ted, I'd say my recommendation would be if you believe in the business and believe the business has a great future, which I do, you've got to continue to invest in the business. You've got to invest in your people. You've got to develop people. That's one of the primary things we do. We continue to try and develop and promote and train people internally. But you've also got to invest in your facilities. You've got to invest in your capabilities. And when you stop investing, you're going to find yourself really trailing the rest of the inventory, not the inventory, the industry, excuse me. So I think investing in the business is really important. And I think staying light on your feet and staying nimble, and regardless of what comes at us, whether it's a potential recession, a big change to EVs, it still gets back to how do we treat our guests and what experience do we provide post-sale that could allow us to retain guests and have a great long-term relationship. So those investments are critical, and the things that we're doing today, we continue to be very excited about auto retail.
Mike Maroone, great to hear it from you from the top. Great advice. Mike, thank you for your insights. And on behalf of the Fixed Ops community, thank you so much for this today.
Ted, I'm honored to be part of your Fixed Ops Roundtable. Thanks for having me.
Mike Maroone here today at the Fixed Ops Roundtable.